The morning of my 34th birthday greeted me with rain tapping lightly against the windows of our cottage in Sussex. I reached across the bed, expecting to feel James's warmth beside me. But his side was already cold. A faint note lay on the pillow. Off to Surrey for the work retreat. Happy birthday, darling. Let's celebrate when I'm back. Love, James. My heart sank. He'd been distant lately, more tied to work than ever. And now, on my birthday weekend, one he knew meant a lot to me, he had vanished before dawn, choosing corporate bonding over cake and candles. I padded downstairs, barefoot and half awake. The kettle whistled as I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the note. James worked in finance, mergers, long hours, late-night calls, but he had always made time for my birthday. Until now. By noon, I was still in my robe. The phone buzzed. It was my sister, Mia. "You're not seriously spending today alone, are you?" she asked, incredulous. I didn't plan to. But James had a retreat in Surrey. There was a pause. A retreat? Over your birthday? That's not like him. That's what I thought. Mia suggested I come up to London, maybe spend the night. But I wasn't in the mood. Something in me hesitated, not just because of the day, but because I had a gnawing feeling I couldn't quite place. It had started a few weeks ago. James whispering on the phone, slipping off to answer messages. A strange charge on the credit card for a boutique hotel. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, I needed a distraction. So I went to the loft, where James kept an old laptop. He used it for photo backups, tax records, nothing current. But perhaps I could find old pictures to make myself feel better. Something to remind me of the man who once adored me. I powered it on. It was slow, dusty. The desktop was cluttered with folders. One, labeled simply work stuff, caught my eye. Inside were photos. Not spreadsheets. Not reports. Photos. A hotel room. The same one from the credit card charge. And in the mirror's reflection, unmistakably, James, shirtless. Pouring champagne. A woman on the bed. Laughing. Blonde. Younger. My hand clutched the mouse, frozen. This wasn't a retreat. This was betrayal. And suddenly I realized, this weekend wasn't about him missing my birthday. It was about hiding something. Or someone. I stared at the screen, my breath caught somewhere between fury and heartbreak. And I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this go. My fingers trembled as I clicked through the rest of the photos. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. James, the man who once left handwritten notes in my lunchbox, now laughing in a hotel room with another woman. The dates on the files confirmed it, just 3 weeks ago. While I'd been sick with the flu, he'd been pouring champagne for her in a suite with velvet drapes and a marble bath. I closed the laptop slowly, as if slamming it shut would make the images disappear. But they were seared into my memory now. Every smile, every touch. I made a cup of tea, more for comfort than thirst. My hands were still shaking. The sound of the kettle felt distant, as though I were floating above my own life. The rational part of me wanted to confront him straight away. Ring him. Scream. Ask how he could do this to me, to us. But a sharper, colder part held me back. No. I needed to be smart. I needed more than suspicion and photos from a forgotten laptop. I needed proof that couldn't be denied. I returned upstairs, opened our shared wardrobe, and scanned the shelves. His suitcase was gone, as expected. But something was off. A familiar aftershave scent lingered, too strong, like he'd sprayed it in a rush. A tie that I'd bought him for our anniversary lay discarded on the floor. He wouldn't have left it behind. He loved that tie. Then I remembered something, the hotel from the photo. I dug out the credit card bill I'd glanced at weeks ago, when the name the Beaumont had stood out. It was a luxury spot in Mayfair. I'd asked James about it, and he'd brushed it off, saying it was a meeting with clients over dinner. I hadn't pushed. Now I knew why. I pulled out my phone, searching the Beaumont online. My heart thudded harder with every tap. I could feel the blood rushing to my face. The images matched the room in the photos perfectly. I rang the hotel. Good afternoon, Beaumont Hotel, how may I help? Hello. I'm calling about a reservation made under the name James Cartwright. I just need to confirm if he's checked in. I'm afraid we can't release guest information. It's urgent. I'm his wife. A pause. 1 moment, please. The seconds dragged. Yes, Mrs. Cartwright. Mr. Cartwright is currently checked in. Is there a message you'd like to leave? I hung up without speaking. So he wasn't in Surrey at all. He was in London. With her. Celebrating something. Or hiding something. And I wasn't about to spend another night waiting for him to return, pretending nothing had happened. I threw clothes into a bag, not caring what I packed. I caught a train into the city just as the sun dipped below the skyline. My heart pounded all the way, but not with fear. With clarity. James had made his choice. Now I was about to make mine. And I wasn't going to knock on that hotel room door with tears in my eyes. I was going to open it with my head held high. The lobby of the Beaumont shimmered with polished brass and low, golden light. My boots clicked across the marble floor as I approached the reception, my coat still damp from the London drizzle. Every breath I took felt heavier, each step deliberate, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and quiet fury. "Can I help you, madam?" the receptionist asked, polite and practiced. "I'm here to see James Cartwright. Room 312. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. "I'll ring through." I waited, eyes fixed on a painting of a windswept cliff above the fireplace, as if grounding myself in something that wouldn't lie. After a moment, she nodded and gestured toward the lifts. He said to come up. Of course he did. He didn't know what was coming. The lift rose smoothly, but my heart did not. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, my fingers were ice cold, clenching the strap of my handbag as if it might anchor me. Room 312. I knocked. Footsteps. A pause. Then the door opened. James stood in the doorway, shirt slightly unbuttoned, hair still damp from a shower. His face dropped when he saw me. "Grace. What are you?" "Don't lie," I said, pushing past him. The room was warm, softly lit, and smelled faintly of roses and perfume. 2 champagne glasses sat on the table. One still full. I heard a soft gasp and turned. There she was, the woman from the photos. She stood at the far end of the room in a red silk robe, her mouth parting in silent surprise, her eyes darting between me and James. Her hair was dark, pinned loosely, her skin pale and flushed from the heat. "I knew it," I said, my voice eerily calm. All those late meetings, the sudden work trips, the lies. James ran a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think. Don't insult me." The woman stepped forward, clutching the robe tighter. I didn't know he was married. I stared at her. She looked younger than me, fresher. But there was something uncertain in her expression, like she wasn't entirely convinced she was the villain here. She wasn't. Not fully. "No need to explain," I said. "He lies to everyone, apparently." "Grace, please," James said, reaching for me. I stepped back. The sight of his hand made my stomach turn. "I packed your things," I told him. "They're by the door at home. Don't come back." He blinked. "You're not even going to hear me out? You don't deserve to be heard." For a moment, silence fell like dust. He looked smaller now, as if the act of being caught had deflated whatever arrogance had kept him upright. And in that moment, I didn't feel sad. I felt free. I turned to leave, my head high, tears threatening but held back by the sheer force of will. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But just as I reached the door, the woman spoke again. "He told me you were ill, that he was only with you out of guilt." I paused. That wasn't just betrayal. That was cruelty. I turned back and faced James one last time. "Enjoy your champagne," I said. "You'll be needing it." Then I walked out. The corridor outside felt cold, but clear. I stepped into the lift and let the doors close without looking back. Let him drown in his lies. I had no intention of staying to pull him out. The days that followed were strange. I returned to the flat in Hampstead and found it too quiet. The absence of James was loud in a different way. No clinking of his coffee cup in the morning, no low hum of his voice on late-night calls. Just silence, thick and echoing. I thought it might soothe me. It didn't. What hurt more than the betrayal itself was realizing how much of myself I'd given to someone who had been deceiving me for God knows how long. I moved on autopilot. I went to work. I smiled when I had to. I replied to messages from friends with vague excuses. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, not yet. Not even Lily, though I knew she'd seen the photos I sent that night. She hadn't replied, probably waiting for me to be ready. Then, one evening, as I was going through the drawer where we kept all our shared documents, I found something. A plain folder, unmarked. Odd. James was meticulous. Everything had labels. Inside were bank statements. Not ours, his personal account. The same account he used before we got married, one I hadn't seen in years. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. The numbers didn't make sense. Transfers. Large ones. Regular, like clockwork. Every third Friday of the month. Not to a savings account. Not to any name I recognized. One stood out. S. Ainsley. Over £2,000 a month, every month, for nearly a year. Why would James be paying someone that kind of money? It wasn't the woman in the hotel, her name was different. I'd glimpsed her ID on the dressing table. Was he paying someone off? My mind raced with possibilities. A mistress? A debt? A child? I shouldn't care, I told myself. We were over. He was out of my life. But curiosity has claws. And this wasn't just about curiosity. This was about truth. About understanding who I had really married. That night, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop and searched. S. Ainsley. London. At first, nothing. Then, a match. Sophia Ainsley. Clinical therapist. Specialized in couples therapy. My blood ran cold. James had never once agreed to go to therapy with me. I'd suggested it, pleaded even, when things had started to feel distant. He'd laughed it off. Was he seeing a therapist behind my back? I stared at the screen, stunned. Then a horrible thought crept in. What if he wasn't the patient? What if he was paying her to say something? To manipulate records? Or was she helping him cover something up? The next morning, I stood outside a quiet brick building in Bloomsbury, watching the name, Dr. Sophia Ainsley, etched in brass beside the door. I hadn't made an appointment. I didn't care. When the receptionist asked who I was, I simply said, "Tell her it's about James Cartwright." There was a pause. Then a nod. "She'll see you." Inside, the office was warm, with soft rugs and tall bookcases. Dr. Ainsley looked up as I entered. Early 40s, silver at her temples, calm eyes. "Mrs. Cartwright," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I was wondering when you'd come." That one sentence knocked the breath from me. She knew who I was. She'd been expecting me. "I need answers," I said, voice steady. "I want to know what James was doing. Why he was paying you." She nodded slowly. "I can't disclose details about patients, but there are things I believe you deserve to know. Especially now." I leaned forward, pulse pounding. "What things?" She met my gaze. Calm, deliberate. "He's not who you think he is." A chill spread through my chest. I couldn't tell if it was fear, or the slow, painful confirmation that I'd only scratched the surface of the lies. She opened a drawer, pulled out a file, and rested her hand on it. And just like that, I knew. Whatever was in that file would change everything. The folder sat on Dr. Ainsley's desk like a loaded gun. I didn't move, afraid the truth would shoot through me the moment it was opened. She slid it toward me with care, not urgency. "This was never meant for your eyes," she said quietly. "But I believe you have the right to know." My hands trembled as I opened the cover. Inside were notes, typed, dated, precise. Pages and pages of sessions. Not with James as a patient, but about him. He had never sat on this couch. He had never spoken to this woman about his emotions, his marriage, or me. The patient was Harriet Whitmore. The name meant nothing. Until I read on. She was his ex-girlfriend. One he'd never mentioned. She had come to Dr. Ainsley claiming James had manipulated her. That he had isolated her from friends and family, made her question her own memory, and drained her savings while convincing her it was for their future. She'd left him years ago. Or so she thought. Because not long after she ended things, she'd started receiving anonymous threats. Her cat disappeared. Her car was keyed. Her clients, she was a freelance designer, began dropping her for no reason. And through it all, she was sure it was James. But she could never prove it. Dr. Ainsley's notes painted a picture of a man who lived two lives, polished and charming in public, calculating and cruel in private. And then came the kicker. In the final page, dated only 3 months ago, Harriet had told Dr. Ainsley she believed James was about to marry someone new. "She's next," the note read. "He's going to do it again. Maybe worse." I stared at the words, the world around me spinning. I was next. I was the next chapter in his twisted pattern. "How do you have all this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "She gave me permission to keep a record in case anything happened to her," Dr. Ainsley replied. "She feared he'd come after her. She vanished not long after that final session. I haven't heard from her since. The air left my lungs. Do you think he—" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. My mind reeled. James, the man I'd built a life with, the man who'd held my hand when I was sick, laughed with me on holidays, was capable of this? I left the office with the folder in my bag, my fingers gripping it like a lifeline. Back in Hampstead, I locked the door and sat on the floor, surrounded by pieces of a life that was never real. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging." No name. No punctuation. Just those 2 words. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. It couldn't be a coincidence. I wasn't safe. But I wasn't going to stop. Because if Harriet was out there, if she'd survived, she needed to know she wasn't alone. And if James thought I'd be silent, he didn't know me at all. I was going to find her. And I was going to end this. Once and for all. The chill of early morning wrapped around me as I stood at the edge of Hampstead Heath, clutching a thermos of coffee I hadn't touched. The file from Dr. Ainsley's office was tucked under my coat, pressed close to my ribs like a secret that could shatter my world at any moment. I'd barely slept. Instead, I pored over every name mentioned in the notes, every address, every scrap of detail Harriet had shared during her sessions. Most of it was vague. She'd been too frightened to leave a clear trail. But one thing stood out. She used to work at a small studio in Highgate, a garden shop-turned-design firm, the kind of place that prided itself on rustic chic and oat milk lattes. It was my only lead. I found the shop just as the staff were arriving, keys jingling and scarves wrapped tight. Inside, the smell of jasmine and ink filled the air. I approached the woman at the counter.
"Hi.
I'm looking for someone who used to work here. Harriet Whitmore?" Her polite smile faltered. "Harriet left years ago." "Do you know where she went?" She hesitated. "I'm not supposed to say." I pulled out the folder and gently laid it on the counter, opening it just enough for the name Harriet Whitmore to be visible on the top page. "I think she's in danger. And I might be too." The woman's expression changed. After a long pause, she scribbled something on a notepad and slid it across the counter. She worked from home towards the end. That's the address she used for deliveries. It was in Muswell Hill. I thanked her and left quickly, nerves tight as piano wire. The flat was tucked behind a row of laurel hedges, quiet and gray. No post in the box. Curtains drawn. I knocked. Waited. Nothing. I was about to leave when I noticed the garden gate was open. Something drew me in. The garden was overgrown but peaceful, with a wrought iron bench beneath a crabapple tree. And there, tucked behind the bench, half buried in leaves, was a phone. A burner phone. My pulse raced as I picked it up. It was dead, but something about it felt intentional. Planted. I took it home, cleaned the mud from its casing, and left it charging while I made tea with shaking hands. When it finally powered on, there was only one message. A draft. Never sent. "If you find this, he's watching you too." No name. No explanation. But I didn't need one. This was Harriet's voice. She'd tried to warn someone. Maybe me. Maybe anyone who found her trail. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail. From James. Hey darling. I popped home, didn't see you. Thought we could have dinner tonight. Let's talk. His voice was smooth, calm. Not a hint of concern. But it made my stomach twist. He knew I was looking. He always knew more than I thought. And then I heard it, something in the background of the voicemail. A bird call. Distinct. Sharp. I froze. That wasn't a call from our flat. That was a call made near me. The same bird had just chirped outside my window not 10 minutes earlier. He wasn't just calling. He was watching. And I was out of time. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Not after hearing that voicemail. Not after realizing James was nearby when he left it. That bird call was no coincidence. It was a warning cloaked in calm tones and endearments. I turned off both my phone and the burner I'd found in Harriet's garden. Then I took a long, aimless walk through central London, ducking into cafes and crossing streets at random, always checking over my shoulder. Eventually, I booked a small room above a pub in Islington using cash. The kind of place where no one asked questions, and the sheets smelled faintly of beer. Sleep never came. In the quiet dark, I kept playing back every moment of the past few weeks, every glance James gave me, every strange phone call, every time I felt watched but told myself I was being paranoid. I wasn't paranoid. I was prey. By morning, I had a plan. I needed to know how far he'd go to keep me quiet, to keep Harriet's story buried. So when James messaged again, asking me to dinner, just us, no pressure. Let's have a proper chat. I said yes. I needed to look him in the eye. The restaurant he chose was our favorite once, a small Italian place near Camden Passage with exposed brick walls and fairy lights strung along the windows. It was charming, disarming, perfect for a lie. He was already seated when I arrived, casually flipping through a wine menu, a boyish grin spreading across his face, as if nothing had happened. You look beautiful, he said, standing to kiss my cheek. I let him. He poured wine, ordered for both of us without asking, and launched into small talk about work and holidays we never took. It was all very normal. That was the most terrifying part. When the starters arrived, I leaned in slightly. I went to see someone who knew Harriet. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Oh. She left something behind. For anyone who might go looking. He set the fork down slowly. You've been busy. So have you, apparently. That voicemail you left. Were you nearby? He smiled tightly. You know you used to trust me. I used to think you deserved it. He let out a quiet sigh, then reached into his coat pocket. My heart pounded. But it wasn't a weapon he pulled out. It was a key. He slid it across the table. Come home. We'll talk properly. No games. I'll show you everything. No more secrets. I stared at the key. Something about it felt rehearsed. As if he'd expected this confrontation. Prepared for it. Why now? I asked. Because I can't lose you, he said simply. And because you're getting too close. He caught himself. Too late. My fingers curled tightly around the napkin in my lap. You mean I'm getting close to the truth? A flicker of something dark passed across his eyes. Not anger. Calculation. He leaned forward. There's a lot you don't understand, Grace. Things Harriet never told anyone. She wasn't innocent. Neither are you. We sat in silence, the candle between us flickering in the draft. Then he smiled again, the charming version, the one that had once made me fall for him. Come home, darling. Let's end this madness. But I had already made up my mind. I wouldn't go home with him. Not tonight. Not ever. I slipped the key into my pocket and stood, heart thudding. I'll think about it, I said. Then I walked away without looking back, already planning my next move. Because now I had something he didn't expect. His trust in me? It was gone. But I had his key, and I was going to use it. The key glinted under the moonlight as I stood outside our old flat in Hampstead. My fingers trembled as they hovered near the lock, the metal strangely warm from my pocket. It had been weeks since I last stepped foot inside this place, but it still looked the same from the outside. Neatly trimmed hedges. Clean windows. Curtains drawn. Too perfect. I waited until just past midnight, when I was sure James wouldn't be home. I'd tailed him earlier from a distance. He'd gone into a members-only club near Soho, the type that stayed open until dawn. He wouldn't be back for hours. The lock turned with a soft click. Inside, everything was as I remembered. The hallway smelled faintly of cedarwood polish and cologne. His coat still hung on the rack. My old shoes, ones I hadn't packed, still sat by the door like obedient pets waiting for a walk. The silence pressed in thickly, broken only by the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the sitting room. I crept past the kitchen and into the study, where James kept his documents, his secrets, his second self. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. I started with the desk. Drawers filled with standard bills, tax forms, a few old notebooks. Nothing suspicious at first glance. But then I spotted it, a slim black folder wedged behind a row of hardback books. I pulled it free and flipped it open. There were photographs inside. Surveillance style, grainy. One of me leaving Harriet's house. Another of me speaking with her neighbor, Toby. Even one from when I visited the library archives. He'd been following me for longer than I'd realized. My pulse thundered in my ears. I turned the page. A photo of Harriet, arms crossed, standing outside what looked like a medical clinic. Below it, a document. A patient file. Her name. Her birth date. Diagnosis. Generalized anxiety. Prescribed diazepam. Observation notes. Disorientated behavior. Frequent paranoia. Suicidal ideation. The file was dated 2 months before her disappearance. I stared at it for a long time. Then something caught my eye. A signature at the bottom. Dr. James A. Everly. My breath caught. He'd been treating her. Not just watching. Not just following. He'd been involved. I stuffed the folder into my bag and turned toward the stairs. If this was here, what else might he have hidden? I stepped into the bedroom. It was pristine. Hotel pristine. The bed was made with military precision. My jewelry box sat untouched on the dresser. But something felt off. I knelt by the wardrobe and pulled the sliding drawer. It stuck halfway. I yanked harder. Inside was a second box. Locked. I used a bobby pin to pry it open. It clicked easily, like it was waiting for me. Inside, a burner phone, a USB stick, and a small velvet pouch. I unzipped it. Inside was Harriet's necklace. The silver chain she always wore, the one she was never seen without. My stomach twisted. If James had this, then Harriet had never left with it. And if she didn't take it, I closed the box quickly and stood, every nerve screaming now. A soft click echoed from downstairs. The front door. He was home. I turned off the lights and crouched behind the bed. Footsteps creaked across the floorboards below. Slow. Heavy. Intentional. He was calling my name. Grace. Another step. Closer. I know you're here. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The stairs groaned under his weight. I clutched the folder tight to my chest, praying the floor wouldn't betray me. I just want to talk, he said softly. That's all. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom. Silence. Then the knob turned. The door creaked open. And I knew this was it. The door cracked open slowly, and there he stood. James. His eyes were cold, yet something unreadable flickered behind them, like a predator who had cornered its prey, but hesitated for just a moment before closing in. My heart slammed against my ribs as I crouched lower, feeling the air around me thicken. I could hear every small movement he made, the soft sound of his breath, the weight of his shoes against the carpet. Grace, he repeated, his voice quieter now, almost soothing. Come out, love. We need to talk. I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck, could hear the beat of my pulse in my ears, drowning out everything else. The room felt too small, too suffocating. I squeezed the folder against me, praying he wouldn't notice the way my hand trembled. He stepped into the room, slowly. Each footfall measured, deliberate, like he knew exactly where I was hiding. But I didn't move. I don't know how you found out, he said, his tone shifting. A little less friendly now, a little more sharp. But I think we've reached a point where you and I can't keep playing games. I stayed silent, not trusting my voice. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I couldn't. Not now. Not when the truth was within my grasp. James stood in front of the bed, his shadows stretching long across the room, just inches away from me. "Do you really think you can just walk out of this?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Do you think Harriet would want you to know all this?" The mention of her name was like a slap to the face. I pushed myself to my feet, the folder still clutched in my hand, every muscle in my body tense, ready to spring. "You've been lying to me," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "For months. You knew exactly what happened to Harriet. You knew she was in trouble, but instead of helping her, you did this." James' lips curled into a thin, dangerous smile. "You really think I did this?" "I was trying to protect her, Grace."
From you.
"From your obsession with the truth. I kept her safe." I swallowed, fighting back the nausea rising in my throat. "Safe? You think what you're doing is protecting her? You've been pulling the strings all along. Watching me. Watching her. You've been playing with all of us like pawns." James' expression darkened, his calm facade slipping. "You don't understand. This wasn't about you or her. It was about keeping control. Keeping everything in balance." He took a step closer, his eyes glinting.
But now?
"Now it's too late. You've seen too much." I lifted the folder between us, the documents inside pressing against the paper. "This is the proof, James. The photos. The records. You've been spying on me on Harriet. And the one thing you didn't count on was me finding out." For a moment, his face flickered with something close to panic. His fingers twitched, but he didn't make a move toward me. "Let me explain, Grace," he said, his voice low. "It's not what you think. You don't know the full story. You're not ready for the truth." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Then tell me. Explain why you've been hiding this. Explain why you've been manipulating everything." He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the mask crack. "Because I couldn't let you ruin everything," he murmured. "Not when I was so close." "Close to what?" He hesitated, his eyes darkening with something dangerous. "Close to making everything right." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Before I could ask him anything more, his hand shot out, grabbing the folder from my hands. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he spat, his grip tight around the paper. "You should have stayed out of it, Grace." I stepped back, my heart racing. "What do you mean? What are you planning?" James didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes flickered to the door, his hand still gripping the folder tightly, as if he was deciding whether or not to tear it in half. "Don't you see, Grace? It's already too late," he said, his voice thick with finality. "I'm not the one who's in danger here. You are." My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. He was willing to go further than I could ever imagine, and that made him far more dangerous than I had ever realized. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me alone in the silence of the room. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat reverberating through the stillness. James had always been calm, calculated, but in that moment, there was something unmistakable in his eyes, a glimpse of the madness beneath the surface. I glanced down at the folder in my hands, the weight of the evidence heavy. The photographs, the records, it was all there, all the proof I needed to bring everything to light. But now, with James' warning ringing in my ears, I understood. This wasn't just about a betrayal. This was something far worse. I needed to leave. To get away from him, from this house, before things escalated even further. But there was one thing I had to do first. With shaky hands, I opened the folder. The last photograph was the most chilling. It showed James, standing in the shadows of a darkened room, watching Harriet. But in the background, a figure loomed, faint but unmistakable. Someone else had been there. Someone who shouldn't have been. The image sent a shiver down my spine, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of it all. Who was that person? And why had they been watching Harriet? Watching us? Suddenly, a chill swept through the room, and I knew I wasn't alone. I turned sharply, but no one was there. The door was locked, the windows shut tight. And yet, the air felt thick with the weight of an unseen presence. I stepped forward cautiously, the tension in the room suffocating. Then, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible noise coming from behind me. A whisper, as if someone was standing just out of sight. "Grace," the voice said, low and almost mournful.
You don't understand.
"None of this is what it seems." I froze, my body stiff with fear. The voice was unmistakably James, but it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from behind the curtain. Slowly, I turned toward the window, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. My heart raced, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, just as I reached out to pull the curtain aside, the door opened. And there he was.
James.
But this wasn't the same man I had confronted earlier. His eyes were wild now, his face twisted in something close to rage. "You should have stayed away from this," he hissed, his hands clenched into fists. "Now, you're going to learn the hard way." Before I could react, he lunged at me, grabbing the folder from my hands and throwing it to the ground. My body slammed against the wall, the impact leaving me breathless. "Why are you doing this?" I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" James' lips curled into a cruel smile. "You're asking the wrong question, Grace. You should be asking yourself why you didn't see it sooner." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of his control over everything. Over Harriet, over me. He'd been pulling the strings all along, and now, with everything in place, he was ready to make his final move. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that I had only one choice left. Fight back. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I shoved him away, stumbling backward. The force of the push sent James off balance, and for a brief moment, he lost his grip on me. I reached for the folder, my fingers brushing against the papers as I struggled to regain my footing. But before I could grab it, James was on me again, his grip tight around my arm. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, his breath hot against my skin. "This is the end, Grace. You can't stop me now." I knew he was right. I had been running from the truth for so long, but now there was no escaping it. The web he'd woven around us was tightening, and the consequences of my actions would soon become unavoidable. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something else. Something that gave me the strength to keep fighting.
Fear.
James was afraid. Afraid of losing control, of everything unraveling. And that was his weakness. I made my move then, kicking his knee and throwing my weight into a desperate lunge for the door. He stumbled back, momentarily disoriented, but I didn't stop.
I ran.
The hallway was a blur as I raced down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. But as I reached the front door, I heard it. A crash. I turned, and my heart stopped. James stood at the top of the stairs, a maniacal grin spreading across his face. "You can't outrun this, Grace," he called down. "You can't escape the truth." I grabbed the doorknob, my fingers shaking as I twisted it open. But before I could step out into the safety of the night, James lunged. And then everything went black.